The village of San Miguel had existed for 3 generations in the high desert of New Mexico territory, built around a reliable spring and maintained by families who'd learned to coax crops from difficult soil and livestock from sparse grazing land. It had never been prosperous, but it had been sustainable. A community of maybe 200 people living in adobe houses clustered around a church and a small plaza, connected to the wider territory by a dirt road that saw maybe 1 wagon a week and occasional travelers passing through on their way to somewhere more important. San Miguel had no marshal because it was too small to justify one. It had no army garrison because it was too remote to warrant protection. It had managed for 70 years through isolation and insignificance, existing below the notice of anyone who might cause trouble because there was nothing in San Miguel worth troubling over. That changed in September 1895 when Miguel Cordero discovered silver on his grazing land 6 miles east of the village, filed a claim with the Territorial Mining Office, and made the mistake of mentioning his discovery to a surveyor passing through who worked for a mining syndicate based in Santa Fe. Within 2 weeks, representatives from the Territorial Mining Company had arrived in San Miguel with documentation claiming Cordero's land actually fell within the boundaries of a much larger claim the company had filed 3 years prior. That Cordero's discovery was therefore company property, and that he needed to vacate his land and abandon his claim or face legal action he couldn't afford to fight. Cordero had refused, had consulted with the village council, which consisted of the 5 eldest men who made collective decisions for San Miguel, and had been advised to hold his ground because the company's claims seemed questionable and because territorial law required actual occupation and development of land to maintain mining claims, and the company had done neither on the parcel Cordero was using. The village had helped Cordero prepare a legal response, had pooled money to hire an attorney in Santa Fe to challenge the company's claim, and had believed that law and documentation would protect them from a dispute that seemed clearly in Cordero's favor. The Territorial Mining Company had responded to Cordero's legal challenge not with better documentation, but with a dozen armed men who arrived in San Miguel on a Monday morning in October and made it clear that legal disputes could be settled through violence as easily as through courts, and violence was considerably faster. The men, led by a company enforcer named Garrett Stone, who'd built a career breaking strikes and intimidating small claimants out of valuable land, had occupied the village plaza, had announced that Cordero had 24 hours to sign over his claim or face consequences, and had demonstrated their seriousness by burning Cordero's barn and shooting his livestock, while the village watched and understood exactly what kind of dispute this had become. San Miguel had no law enforcement to call. The nearest territorial marshal was in Santa Fe, 3 days away by fast horse, and the village's letter requesting help had been met with a response that the marshal's jurisdiction covered legal disputes, not claim conflicts, and that San Miguel should work through the territorial courts if they believed the company's claim was fraudulent. The territorial governor's office had been similarly unhelpful, advising that property disputes were civil matters and that violence should be reported to local law enforcement, which San Miguel didn't have. The village had been caught in the bureaucratic gap between law that theoretically protected them and enforcement that was too distant or too disinterested to actually help. Cordero had refused to sign over his claim, despite the threats and the burning barn and the dead livestock. The company men had escalated, had beaten Cordero in the plaza in front of his family and the village, had promised that the next escalation would be his house and possibly his family. and had given him another 24 hours to comply. The village council had met in the church to discuss options that all seemed impossible. They could fight, but they were farmers and herders facing a dozen armed professionals who killed for money. They could flee, but abandoning their homes and land meant losing everything their families had built over generations. They could wait for legal resolution, but legal processes took months, and the company men had promised violence within hours. That was when Father Esteban, the village priest who'd served San Miguel for 20 years and knew everyone's history and connections, had mentioned that he'd heard stories about a man who helped communities that had no other options, who traveled through the territories taking work that involved standing between powerful people and vulnerable ones, who didn't work for money, but for reasons that seemed to involve his own sense of what was right. Father Esteban didn't know the man's name or current location, but he knew someone in Albuquerque who might be able to send word, who might be able to reach someone who could reach the man who helped villages that had no army and no sheriff and no hope. The village council had authorized Father Esteban to send whatever messages he could send, to promise whatever payment the village could afford, to beg if necessary, because begging was easier than watching their neighbors get killed defending land that was rightfully theirs. Esteban had spent 2 days riding to Albuquerque, had found his contact, who knew someone who knew how to leave word at certain places where certain people checked for messages, and had sent a desperate plea. San Miguel, New Mexico territory, being threatened by mining company enforcers, need help, have no law and no defense. We'll pay what we can. Please come if you can come. 5 days after Esteban sent the message, with the company men still occupying the plaza and making increasingly violent threats, and Cordero's family hiding in the church because their home was no longer safe, a stranger had ridden into San Miguel leading a pack horse and wearing the trail dust of someone who'd traveled fast and far. He'd gone directly to the church where the village council was meeting, had introduced himself to Father Esteban as someone who'd received word that San Miguel needed help, and had asked for a complete accounting of the situation before deciding whether to get involved. The village council, speaking through Esteban, who translated when necessary because not all the elders spoke English fluently, had explained everything. Cordero's silver discovery, the company's fraudulent claim, the legal challenge, the armed men who'd arrived to enforce compliance through violence, the burning barn and dead livestock, the beating in the plaza, the 24-hour deadlines that kept being extended with worse threats, the complete absence of law enforcement or territorial protection, the desperate message sent to Albuquerque hoping it might reach someone who could help. The stranger had listened to all of it, had asked specific questions about the company's claim boundaries and Cordero's documentation and the number of armed men and their patterns of behavior. Then he'd asked the question that mattered most. What do you want me to do? Because I can stand between you and them. But that only works if you're willing to stand with me. I can't defend a village that won't defend itself. I can only help a village that's willing to fight but needs someone to show them how. The council had looked at each other, had thought about their farmers and herders facing professional gunmen, and had been honest about their fear. One of the elders, a man named Tomas Gutierrez, who'd fought Apache raiders 40 years ago and understood violence, had spoken for the group. We're not fighters. Most of us have never shot at a man. But we'll fight if you show us how. We'll stand with you if you stand with us. We just need someone who knows what they're doing to give us a chance of surviving this. The stranger had nodded. Then here's what we're going to do. Those 12 men think they're facing a village of farmers who will fold under pressure. They're not expecting organized resistance. We're going to give them something they're not expecting, and we're going to do it in a way that minimizes how many of you have to die defending your homes. He'd spent the next 6 hours organizing San Miguel's defense with the precision of someone who'd done this before. He'd assessed the village layout, had identified the natural choke points and defensive positions, had determined which men could shoot reliably, even if they couldn't shoot fast. He'd positioned riflemen in second-story windows with clear sightlines to the plaza. He'd created fallback positions and established signals. He'd taught basic tactics to men who'd never fought in coordination before. When to shoot, when to hold fire, how to reload under pressure, how to move between positions without getting killed. Most importantly, he'd given them a plan that didn't require them to be gunfighters to succeed. You don't have to be fast, he'd told them. You have to be positioned well and patient and willing to follow instructions. Speed doesn't matter when you have the high ground and they're exposed in the plaza. Discipline matters. Patience matters. Waiting for my signal matters. Do those things and we win without most of you firing a shot. That evening, the stranger had walked into the plaza where Garrett Stone and his company men were camped, had approached Stone directly, and had delivered a message that was clear and final. Miguel Cordero isn't signing over his claim. The Territorial Mining Company's documentation is fraudulent, and you know it. You're leaving San Miguel tomorrow morning. You can leave alive and whole, or you can leave in whatever condition results from trying to stay. Your choice. Stone had looked at this stranger who'd appeared from nowhere with no authority and no obvious backup, had seen a single man facing a dozen armed professionals, and had made the calculation that most bullies made when facing someone who wasn't afraid. He'd decided the stranger was bluffing. "You're one man," Stone had said. "We're 12. You walk away now or you die tonight. Those are your choices." The stranger had smiled slightly. "I'm one man who knows what I'm doing, facing 12 men who think their numbers mean they'll win. Numbers mean nothing if you're all standing in a plaza with no cover when the shooting starts. You leave at dawn or you find out what happens when a village fights back with someone teaching them how." Stone had given the order for his men to kill the stranger right there in the plaza, had expected a quick execution that would terrorize the village into compliance. What happened instead was the stranger dropping to the ground as rifle fire erupted from 6 different windows around the plaza, methodical and aimed, dropping 3 of Stone's men in the first volley and sending the rest scrambling for cover that didn't exist. The stranger had rolled behind the stone well in the center of the plaza, had drawn his own weapon, and had added precise fire to the coordinated shooting from the village defenders he'd positioned. The fight had lasted maybe 2 minutes. 3 of Stone's men had died in the initial volley. 4 more had been wounded badly enough to be out of the fight. Stone himself had taken a bullet through the shoulder from the stranger's weapon and had dropped his gun, trying to return fire from inadequate cover. The remaining men had thrown down their weapons and surrendered before the village defenders could reload for a second volley. When the smoke cleared, San Miguel had defended its land and its people with the help of a stranger who taught them that numbers didn't determine outcomes when one side had preparation and positioning, and the other side had arrogance. The village men had come down from their positions, shaking with adrenaline and fear and relief that they'd survived something they'd been certain would kill them. The stranger had secured the surrendering company men, had treated the wounded enough to keep them alive for territorial authorities, and had sent word to Santa Fe that Garrett Stone and the Territorial Mining Company enforcers were being held in San Miguel on charges of arson, destruction of property, assault, and attempted murder. The territorial marshal, who'd been too busy to help when San Miguel sent their first letter, had arrived 3 days later to take custody of prisoners and documentation, and had been forced to investigate the company's fraudulent claim because it was now attached to criminal charges he couldn't ignore. The investigation had revealed what Cordero and San Miguel had known all along. The Territorial Mining Company's claim was based on falsified survey documents, and the company had been running the same scheme across New Mexico territory, using fraudulent claims and armed enforcers to steal valuable discoveries from small claimants who couldn't afford to fight back. Stone's arrest had opened cases in 6 other territories. The company itself had faced territorial charges and eventual dissolution, and Miguel Cordero had kept his silver claim and the profits it eventually generated. The village had tried to pay the stranger with what little money they could pool together. He'd refused payment, but had accepted a meal and a place to sleep, and the satisfaction of knowing San Miguel would survive. Before leaving, he talked with the men who'd defended their village, had told them that what they'd done wasn't just about silver claims or company enforcers, but about proving to themselves that they could stand up to power that seemed overwhelming. "You're not fighters," he'd told them. "You don't have to be, but you're also not helpless. You're people with homes worth defending and the will to defend them if someone shows you how. Remember that the next time someone tries to take what's yours by force, remember you won. Remember how you won. And remember that violence isn't always about being the fastest or the meanest. Sometimes it's just about being prepared and patient and willing to stand together when standing alone would mean dying." Father Esteban had asked the stranger the question everyone wanted to ask. "Why did you come?" We sent a desperate message, not knowing if anyone would receive it or respond. "You rode maybe 200 miles to help a village you'd never been to, for people you'd never met, for no payment. Why?" The stranger had been honest in the way he was when people asked questions that mattered. "Because I've seen too many villages like yours get destroyed by companies like that one because they had no army and no sheriff and no hope, and nobody showed up to help them. Because the frontier is full of powerful people using violence to take from vulnerable people, and someone needs to show those vulnerable people that they can defend themselves. And because that message Father Esteban sent reached me in Albuquerque when I was between jobs, and it seemed like work worth doing." He'd ridden out of San Miguel the next morning, leaving behind a village that had learned it wasn't helpless, that 12 armed men could be defeated by farmers who'd never fought before if those farmers had good positioning and someone who knew what they were doing, that having no army and no sheriff didn't mean having no defense if you were willing to defend yourselves. Here's what's worth understanding about frontier violence and the communities that survived it. The most important factor wasn't always having professional fighters or official law enforcement. Sometimes it was having someone who could show ordinary people that they were capable of extraordinary defense if they had preparation and positioning and patience. San Miguel had sent word for help with no certainty anyone would come, had received a stranger who'd ridden 200 miles to teach them how to defend themselves, and had learned that the power to protect their homes had been there all along, waiting for someone to show them how to use it. 21 towns now, and in one of them, Farmers and herders were telling their children about the day they defended San Miguel against a mining company's private army, about the stranger who taught them how, about the discovery that having no sheriff didn't mean having no protection if you were willing to stand together and fight for what was yours. Tell me something before you go. Where in the world are you hearing this story right now? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this trail reaches. And if you want to keep writing, if you want to know what happens when a village with no army and no sheriff sends desperate word to a stranger who shows them they were never actually helpless, the story is waiting for you on the screen right now. Watch it. The road stretched west through New Mexico high desert, and somewhere behind him, San Miguel was rebuilding Miguel Cordero's barn with silver money from a claim the territorial mining company had tried to steal through violence and had lost through the same violence turned against them. The stranger rode on, carrying the satisfaction of farmers who'd learned to be defenders and a village that had discovered power it didn't know it possessed. I'll see you on the trail.